The island of Sodor is a wonderful place. There are lots and lots of engines. Who's that puffing along the track? It's Edward. Edward is a very fine engine. He is blue with red stripes and has the number 2 painted on his tender. He is often called Edward the Wise, but Edward always listens carefully to the other engines. One day he listened too carefully to Gordon. Rocky the crane had arrived on Sodor. Rocky was strong and powerful, but he had no engine. Another engine had to pull him. Gordon called Rocky newfangled nonsense. He snorted that Rocky may be new, but he wasn't really useful. Edward always thought Gordon was right, so he agreed with him. Later, Edward had to pull flatbeds of heavy poles. Rocky offered to help, but Edward didn't want the help of newfangled nonsense. So he puffed quickly off before the poles had been properly tied down. Edward was so busy thinking about Rocky that he didn't see the red signal in time. He screeched to a halt and poles tumbled all over the track. Emily and Thomas couldn't puff through. Then Gordon steamed into the poles and came off the track. It was a terrible mess. Luckily, Edward is a wise engine. He knew that he and Gordon had been wrong to say Rocky wasn't really useful. And now he knew he needed Rocky's help. Edward brought Rocky to the poles, and Rocky cleared the tracks in no time. Rocky and Edward became firm friends. Edward is everyone's friend. One day, Edward was chosen for a very special. He was to pull the Duke and Duchess's furniture to their summer house. Spencer was to take the Duke and Duchess. Gordon and James wanted Edward to race Spencer. Edward couldn't let his friends down. But Spencer was faster. He overtook Edward easily. Edward huffed and puffed his hardest. The Duke and Duchess stopped to take some photographs. Spencer was so far ahead in the race, he decided to have a rest. So Spencer snoozed and Edward puffed. He puffed right past sleepy Spencer and won the race. Edward felt so happy his boiler bubbled. The other engines were very proud of Edward, and Edward was quite proud of himself. Edward is old and Edward is wise. Wise enough to know that being a really useful engine is very important. And having really good friends makes every day on Sodor a happy day. The island of Sodor is a wonderful place. There are lots and lots of engines. Who's that puffing along the track? It's Henry. Henry is a big green engine with a big green coal tender, and a number 3 is painted on the side. Henry's firebox needs special Welsh coal. When that burns brightly and his steam puffs proudly, Henry is as fast and as strong as any engine. Sometimes he wishes he could pull the express. One day, Henry's wish came true. He saw a group of children by a tree in the forest. They told Henry it was a wishing tree. So Henry wished he could pull the express. The next day, Gordon was sent to the repair yards. Henry was to pull the express. His wish had come true. This made Henry very happy. But later, Henry wasn't happy. Passengers were jiggled and jolted, food flew in the air, and buffers were bashed and biffed. Henry felt terrible. Henry went back to the wishing tree. He wished he would never have to pull the express again. Henry always works hard to do the best job he can. One day, Henry puffed over to the Scottish castle. The fat controller asked him to collect a new flagpole. Henry looked everywhere for something tall. He was so busy looking up at Cranky, who was tall, that he biffed into a flatbed. The flagpole rolled right off it, and Salty rolled right over it. The brand new flagpole snapped in two. Henry had to find another flagpole. He puffed all over the island, but he couldn't find one. At last he chuffed sadly back to Brendam Docks. Then Henry saw an old sailing ship. Visitors were taking photographs of it. Suddenly Henry saw that he had found the new flagpole. The old mast was perfect for the job. And he was right. The fat controller was very pleased, and that made Henry happy. That night, the flag was hoisted on the old ship's mast. It looked wonderful. Henry thought it was the nicest thing he had ever seen. Henry is everyone's friend. He cares about everyone. He is really useful and really happy to be Henry. The island of Sodor is a wonderful place. There are lots and lots of engines. Who's that puffing along the track? It's James. James is a bright red engine. He has the number 5 painted on his tender, a bright brass dome, and 6 strong driving wheels that clickety-clack along the tracks of Sodor. James is the only red engine and is very proud of his red coat. One day, James had a bright new coat of red paint. He wanted all the other engines to tell him how wonderful he looked. The next morning, the fat controller told James to help Percy at the coaling plant. But James went to gaze at his reflection in the canal. At last, James arrived. The yard manager told him to take an extra long line of trucks to Brendam Docks. James was very happy. There were lots of people at the docks to tell him how splendid he looked. But the trucks were very troublesome. They wriggled and giggled, they biffed and they bashed, and covered James in coal dust. When James arrived at Brendam, his bright red coat was very dirty. Luckily, James is never too proud to see the funny side, but his pride can get him into a lot of trouble. There was to be a new holiday poster for the island of Sodor. The fat controller chose Edward to be the poster engine. James was upset. He and Edward are almost the same. James decided to do everything he could to be the poster engine. He tried to get into the poster photograph, but the fat controller sent him away. Thomas and Percy told James that Edward was chosen because he was gentle. And Edward didn't mind doing dirty jobs. So James was gentle at the coaling yard. But that made him late. James took the express track to race Edward. He was just in front when a signal turned red. James screeched to a halt, but Edward couldn't stop in time. Edward ran into James, and James shot straight through the poster. Now James was the poster engine. James knows when he has gone too far. And then he helps his friends. That's because James is a really useful red engine, and he shines most of all when he is with his friends. The island of Sodor is a wonderful place. There are lots and lots of engines. Can you tell who this is? It's Diesel. Diesel is a diesel engine. He runs on diesel oil, not coal. Diesel is very proud to be the first diesel engine to arrive on the island of Sodor. He is black with 6 wheels and is sometimes called Devious Diesel. He enjoys telling steamies that soon they'll all be sent to the scrapyard. One day Diesel was at the quarry. Thomas arrived to help. Diesel decided to tease Thomas. First, he shunted Thomas under the hopper. He told Thomas he was a stinky steamy. Then Diesel told Thomas that the Fat Controller was thinking of scrapping steamies. Thomas was worried, and that made Diesel laugh. The next day, Salty arrived with new fuel from the mainland. Diesel was very excited. The new fuel made his axles tingle. He revved his engine faster and faster. He wanted Thomas to see he was the fastest engine in the world. Suddenly, Diesel's engine coughed. Then it started to splutter. Black, smelly smoke billowed from his exhaust. The yard manager said it was the new fuel. Water must have leaked into the tanks. Diesel felt very sick. He couldn't do anything. Worse, Diesel had to wait to be rescued. Thomas arrived with some new fuel. When his tank was filled, Diesel's engine whirred and purred perfectly. Diesel thanked Thomas for making him feel better. Even Diesel likes to be really useful. One day, Diesel met Emily at the water tower. Emily was to pick up special coaches for Gordon. Diesel wanted to tell Emily something important, but she whooshed away huffily. When Emily arrived to pick up the coaches, Diesel had taken them. Emily chased Diesel all over the island. Diesel was fast and Diesel was devious. Emily couldn't catch him. Until finally, Diesel's engine broke down. It was too old. Diesel told Emily he had taken the coaches because he was upset. Gordon wasn't the only one to set a record. Diesel had set a record too. He had shunted more trucks in one day than any other Diesel. Emily wanted Diesel to have a prize. So later, Emily puffed in with a brand new engine. Diesel was so happy he forgot to be oily. The Fat Controller and all his engines wanted Diesel to know he was special. Diesel had never felt special before. He even started to think that maybe steamies weren't so bad after all. The island of Sodor is a wonderful place. There are lots and lots of engines. Who's that puffing along the track? It's Percy. Percy is a tank engine. He is green, with 4 wheels, and has the number 6 painted on his bunker. Percy is the smallest of all the engines at Tidmouth, but he works just as hard as the big engines. His special job is pulling the mail trucks. This job makes him very proud. Percy is also very proud of the island of Sodor. One day, he was asked by the Fat Controller to take a famous artist round the island. The artist wanted to paint a picture of the spirit of Sodor. Percy took the famous artist to Norramby Beach, to Shen Valley, and at last to Knapford Station. But the famous artist didn't want to paint any of them. That made Percy very cross. He wished his steam so hard that the famous artist's hat flew into the air. Suddenly the famous artist knew exactly what he wanted to paint. He wanted to paint Percy. Because Percy is the smallest engine, the big engines sometimes tell him what to do. So it was a very special day for Percy when he could tell them what to do. Lady Hat told Percy to be in charge. The Fat Controller was sick. He had to tell James and Gordon and Toby what to do. Sometimes Percy gets things muddled up. So Percy listened very hard to Lady Hat. Percy felt very proud to be controller for the day. He couldn't wait to tell the engines what to do. Grandly, Percy told James to be a busy bee, Gordon to pull very slow coaches, and Toby to pull the express. Later, Percy puffed off to check on his engines. Gordon was puffing very slowly. James was painted yellow and black. The children thought he looked like a giant stripy bee. And Toby was using all his steam to pull the express. Gordon, James and Toby saw that all the children were laughing at them. That made them very unhappy. Percy felt terrible. He had muddled everything up, and he didn't know how to unmuddle it. Luckily, Thomas came to help Percy. Together they put everything right. And when the Fat Controller arrived, he was very pleased. Whenever Percy is in trouble, he knows his friend Thomas will help him. That makes Percy very happy. And Percy, more than anything else, is a very happy little engine. The island of Sodor is a wonderful place. There are lots and lots of engines. Who's that puffing along the track? It's Thomas. Thomas is a bright blue tank engine with red stripes. He has 6 small wheels, a short funnel and dome, and a number 1 painted in yellow on his boiler. Thomas is always busy and is especially happy when he's with his carriages, Annie and Clarabel. Thomas knows everyone on the island of Sodor, but he does have one special friend, and that's Percy. One day, the Fat Controller told all the engines that the railway inspector was coming. He would give a special prize to the best turned out engine. Gordon, James and Emily were all sure a big engine would win the prize, but Thomas and his best friend Percy hoped they might win. The big engines laughed at them. Thomas and Percy had to work at the quarry. By the end of the day, Percy and Thomas were very, very dirty. Percy was sure they would never win first prize now. Thomas wanted to cheer his friend up, so they raced to the washdown. But when they arrived, Gordon, James and Emily all looked like the smartest engines on the railway. Now Thomas was worried, but his friend Percy cheered him up. When Thomas and Percy arrived at the coaling plant, they were surprised. James biffed into a truck. Now all the big engines, the Fat Controller and the inspector were covered in coal dust. But not Thomas and Percy. They won first prize and each had a rosette. Thomas knew he couldn't have done it without his friend Percy. Sometimes you need to rely on your friends. One day, Thomas was picking up telephone engineers. They were to mend the telegraph poles. A great storm had blown them down. Then Thomas saw something wonderful. Edward told him about an old story. It said that there was something magical at the end of a rainbow. Thomas huffed and puffed all over the island. He was looking for the end of the rainbow. Thomas was so busy he didn't have time to say hello to his friends. And he didn't have time to help his friends. Then there was trouble. Thomas hadn't seen the telegraph pole. Thomas was stuck. He thought none of his friends would help him. But Thomas was wrong. All Thomas's friends passed on the news that he was in trouble. In no time, Harvey arrived to pull Annie and Clarabel back onto the rails. Now Thomas didn't want to look for the end of the rainbow anymore. He wanted to be really useful. Later, Thomas puffed back to Tidmouth's sheds. There was the end of the rainbow, and there were all his friends. Thomas's friends are very important. They make the Fat Controller's railway very special, and they make Thomas feel he is the luckiest steam engine ever. The island of Sodor is a wonderful place. There are lots and lots of engines. Who's that puffing along the track? It's Toby! Toby is very special. He is Sodor's only steam tram, and he has the number 7 painted on his side. He has cowcatchers on the front and a very loud bell. Toby likes doing lots of jobs, shunting vegetables and shunting coal. And he especially likes seeing the animals at Farmer McColl's farm, even the chickens. Toby also has his own carriage, Henrietta. Together they take children to and from the seaside. Toby has his own shed at Arsdale End. He's very happy there. One morning, Toby puffed out of his shed. The birds twittered good morning to him. That made Toby happy. Thomas puffed by. Toby liked saying hello to Thomas. Then he chuffed off to work. Thomas spotted that Toby was wet. Then he saw that there were a lot of holes in the roof of Toby's shed. Thomas decided to ask the Fat Controller to build Toby a new roof. Thomas was sure that would make Toby very happy, but it didn't. Toby looked sadder and sadder. Soon the new roof was finished. Thomas was very pleased, but Toby looked sadder than ever. Thomas asked Toby what was wrong. Toby told Thomas he liked his old roof with holes. The birds flew in through the holes to make their nests, so Toby's shed was their home too. Later, Thomas had an idea. He asked the workmen to build a new home for the birds. Toby's birds came back, and that made Toby very happy. But one day, James told Toby that the new Sodor Museum was opening. All the engines were having a repaint for the celebration. Toby wasn't having a repaint. Toby was worried. He knew that museums were places where they sent old things that weren't useful anymore. Toby thought the Fat Controller wanted Toby to be in the museum. Toby decided to show the Fat Controller he was too useful to be put in a museum. Then he saw the Fat Controller. He didn't want the Fat Controller to talk to him. Then there was trouble. The Fat Controller would put him in the museum now, but Toby was wrong. The Fat Controller told him that he was far too useful, and because he was Sodor's only steam tram, he had a special job for Toby. Toby was to take all the visitors to the museum for the grand opening. Toby the steam tram is very special. Everyone on Sodor knows that, and they are all very proud of Toby. The island of Sodor is a wonderful place. There are lots and lots of engines. Who's that puffing along the track? It's Gordon. Gordon is a great grand engine. He is blue with red stripes and has the number 4 painted on his tender. Gordon is one of the strongest engines on the Fat Controller's railway. His special job is pulling the express. Strongest and best, cleanest and fastest and pulls the express. Gordon wants all the other engines to hear. But one day, Gordon heard something that he hoped none of the other engines could hear. His engine was squeaking. Gordon didn't feel the most important engine on Sodor anymore. Diesel teased him at the docks. He said Gordon would be sent to the scrapyard. Gordon believed him. Gordon had a special. He had to take the children to the docks to catch their boat. Gordon found out that the slower he went, the less he squeaked. Gordon went slower and slower. The Fat Controller was on board. He wanted to know why the fastest engine on the railway was going so slowly. This made Gordon very unhappy. So Gordon decided it didn't matter if he was going to be scrapped. He would make his last journey the fastest he had ever puffed. Gordon's pistons pumped and his boiler bubbled. He squeaked, rattled and rolled into the docks. But Gordon didn't mind. The children were on time for their boat, and the Fat Controller didn't scrap Gordon. He sent him to the repair yard. Gordon knew he was an important engine, and Gordon likes to feel important. One day, the Fat Controller told Gordon that if he pulled the express across the island and back again on time, he would set a new record. Gordon was excited. At the coal depot, his tender was loaded with coal. Gordon was ready to wheesh away. Then the yard manager gasped. Gordon had been given Henry's coal by mistake. Gordon knew Henry needed special coal, but he thought it would make him go faster, so Gordon pretended not to hear. He raced away. Gordon was very happy. But Henry wasn't happy at all. There was no more special coal at the depot. Without it, Henry could hardly puff at all. Gordon saw how sick Henry was. Gordon didn't feel important anymore. And he didn't feel happy. He felt bad. Now, Gordon didn't care about setting a new record. He cared about helping his friend. If an engine is in trouble, Gordon will be there to help. That's why it feels good to be Gordon. The island of Sodor is a wonderful place. It's home to lots and lots of engines. Who lives high up in the hills? That's right, the engines of the narrow gauge railway. The narrow gauge engines live and work in the hills of Sodor. They are small engines. The narrow gauge engines work for Mr. Percival, the thin controller. He tells them if they are to shunt slate, pull coal wagons, or deliver supplies. They look after each other, especially if one of them is in trouble. And one day, Sir Handel was in trouble. Sir Handel is one of the oldest narrow gauge engines. One day, Sir Handel had a special. He was to pull wagons of apples very carefully. But Sir Handel couldn't puff up the hill. His pistons popped, his traction rods rattled, and his boiler bubbled and bounced. Peter Sam came to Sir Handel's rescue. He pushed and he puffed Sir Handel up the hill. Then Sir Handel had another special. This time it was wagons of sheep. Again, Sir Handel couldn't get up the hill. This time Duncan chuffed to his rescue. But no one could help Sir Handel when the thin controller and Mrs. Percival were on board. The hill was steep. Sir Handel shuddered and juddered and stopped. The picnic hamper burst open. Sir Handel felt terrible. Now he was sure he would be sent to the scrapyards. But Sir Handel was wrong. Thomas brought a special engineer. Sir Handel was fixed in no time. all the engines like to help each other. One day, Mr. Percival had an important job for Duncan and Rusty. But Duncan found a hidden track. He was supposed to be pulling coal trucks with Rusty, but he wanted to see where the track went. Rusty was cross. He told Duncan they had to work, but Duncan is a narrow-gauge engine who likes adventures. Rusty chugged off, and Duncan chuffed off to have an adventure. He followed the old track into the side of a mountain. Duncan was excited. Then there was trouble. Duncan had biffed into a wooden prop. The roof fell in and Duncan was trapped in the mine. But Duncan is also a clever engine. Slowly and carefully, he pushed behind some heavy trucks. Until at last, he pushed the trucks out into the open air. And there was Rusty. Rusty had been worried about Duncan. And Duncan was very happy to see Rusty. Duncan still likes adventures, but he likes his narrow-gauge friends most of all. The engines of the Thin Controllers Railway are very special. Thomas always enjoys his visits to see them. They may be smaller than he is, but they are just as useful. The island of Sodor is a wonderful place. There are lots and lots of engines. Who's that puffing along the track? It's Emily. Emily is a very special engine. She is painted a deep dark green. She has big driving wheels and a beautiful brass dome. And Emily is a very proud engine. She likes to tell other engines how to do their jobs. One day, Emily had dropped visitors off at the ruined castle. Kings and queens had lived there long ago. It made Emily think she would like to be a queen. Queens tell everyone what to do. Emily saw Toby and Percy working hard in the shunting yards. Toby had to leave Percy with some very troublesome trucks. Toby told Percy not to worry. He would be back soon to help. Emily wanted to play kings and queens, so she decided to play with Percy. She decided to tell him what to do. After all, as queen, she knew best. Emily told Percy to take the trucks along the fast track. Percy was worried. But maybe Emily knew best. Percy puffed off quickly. Then there was trouble. The speeding trucks hit Mavis. Mavis spilled slate all over the rails, and a truck knocked over a telephone pole. Then Toby ran into the pole and was derailed. Emily gasped. She had caused confusion and delay. The Fat Controller was very cross. Emily told him she wasn't a queen and she didn't know best. But Emily always likes to be with the other engines. Emily used to live on her own at Knapford Yards. One day, the Fat Controller decided to knock down the old Tidmouth sheds. Thomas was sent to sleep in Emily's shed. Emily didn't like that. She didn't like Thomas's noisy sleep whistling. It kept her awake all night and made her grumpy. But one night, when Thomas wasn't there, Emily missed him. She even missed his sleep whistle. Thomas was her good friend. She wanted to be with him. Then Emily went to visit the new Tidmouth sheds. She was very surprised. An extra space had been built, especially for her. Emily was very happy. Now she could be with all her friends, and with her special friend Thomas. Emily can be a big bossy Buffers. She can say things she shouldn't, and do things Thomas wouldn't. But her big brass dome shines brightest when Emily is with her STEAM team friends.